Hi, welcome to a A-Stick09 Flight School video. Today we're going to be doing a crash course on the X Cub. It is maybe the most unique single-engine propeller plane out of the ones currently in the sim, in the vanilla game at least, and for that reason I think it's worth a video explaining why it's different than most of the other planes and why you have to take extra care when flying it. The avionics are also, as far as I know, unique, so there's some extra fun there when you have to mess with the autopilot and stuff. So without much further ado, I will get into the basics, which is first starting the engine. I started on the taxiway with the runway with the engine off. Normally you do this on a taxiway, but I'm saving time. So we're going to pull up our checklist. Gonna reset this because I actually did it once before doing the video. And let's start at the beginning. Parking brake is under the seat on the left. It's kind of notoriously hard to see from the cockpit view. I can kind of wiggle it around so you can see it down here. Put this on a keybind because you will not want to constantly fiddle with your camera to actually set and release it when you're flying. So set that on and we're good to go. The fuel selector is down here on the left. You have three options: right, where it's currently at, left, which is pointing straight up, and then off, which is cut off. This corresponds with the two fuel tanks in either the wings on the left and right side. You can see how much fuel is in either tanks using these little indicators right here. The fuel selector doesn't automatically switch between tanks in flight, and you have to do that manually every 15 or 20 minutes. The cockpit avionics in a real plane typically will have a reminder timer that'll tell you when to switch between them. The game doesn't have that yet, so you have to take extra care to remember. It's not a huge deal if you forget. What will happen is you'll fully drain one of the wings, maybe you even run out. You can switch to the other and it's no big deal, the engine will start again, but then you will be left with a permanent imbalance as you have an extra 15 or 20 gallons of fuel on the right side, and you will have to constantly correct left until your fuel runs out, which is just annoying. There's no aileron trim in this plane to compensate for that. So try to remember every once in a while to look at your fuel gauges, and if there's an imbalance, you can just switch to the other tank. If you accidentally switch it off, if you use a scroll wheel, sometimes it's pretty buggy. Don't worry about it, just switch it back on in flight. The engine will pick up again and keep running. I think that's all I could go over right now, so let's start by turning on the battery switch. Mixture to rich. If you're at a high elevation, I've noticed that if you're maybe above 5,000 feet when you're starting the engine, with this plane, the full rich mixture is actually too rich and the engine might not even start. So I would recommend, if you're above 5,000 feet or so, turning the mixture down to 90% and then treating that as your full rich. Ignition switch is on, alternator field on, prop speed control lever, that's this blue one right here. I have it on a axis on my throttle. You don't really need to though. You don't mess with it very much. You leave it at 100% for everything but cruising, in which case you sometimes turn it down. So it's totally fine to just keep it as a mouse, like a cockpit mouse control that you can fiddle with every once in a while. Throttle, we're going to open that 1/4 of an inch, and then we just turn it over. And the engine starts. The throttle is pretty much perfectly at 1,000 RPM if you open it to a 1/4 inch. Otherwise adjust it, and then check your oil pressure. It's good. And then the post starting procedure is just your lights on over here, avionics master on, and then when you're ready to taxi or take off, you release your parking brake. So I'm not going to do that yet, but I'm going to close out the checklist. One thing to note is that this is a type of aircraft called a tail dragger, where your rear landing gear is at the tail of the aircraft instead of a tricycle one like a Cessna. This means this means a few things, but the most notable effect is that you need a lot more rudder authority on takeoff. It's a little bit more squirrely. You have to be paying extra attention to keep the thing straight. And if you do not have a good rudder axis, I'm on a joystick twist, and even that is a bit difficult, and I'm not super good controlling the rudder during takeoff with a joystick twist, because you have to be pretty on it. Especially mine has a pretty big dead zone, so you'll see me struggle a bit keeping it straight on the runway, but I don't really know how to deal with that because of the dead zone that I have without messing with the joystick settings a bunch. So I'm not perfect, and I even have a rudder. If you're on a really basic joystick or a gamepad or keyboard and mouse, I highly recommend just going into assistance and turning auto rudder on if you're flying the X Cub or any of the other tail draggers. It's going to make a world of difference. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to stay straight on the runway, and no one's going to laugh at you, because you really need that rudder control, and if you don't have it, then it's going to be bad. So just a note there, auto rudder is fine to use on this plane, only if you have really good rudder control should you actually try to use it. So that's something to keep an eye out for when you're taking off. You just have to really pay attention to keep sure you're straight and do very minor rudder adjustments all the time. Another thing is that the visibility isn't great, so I'm going to zoom out and go a little bit higher. So once the plane levels out before takeoff, it'll get a bit easier to see, but at least for the starting, using the peripheral vision off to the sides is pretty important. So yeah, let's zoom back out. I'm going to do flaps down 1 notch which is about 16 degrees on just this lever right here. For takeoff on such a long runway, you don't need any, but I'm doing it just for good practice. About 10 degrees is average. And then anything more than that you'll use for landing or really, really short takeoffs. But those are pretty challenging. And otherwise, I don't think I have anything else to set. Once we get in the air and start cruising toward the direction of our target, I'll actually show you how to plug in a destination into the avionics and set the autopilot and all that. I think this is the airport we're going to. I'll have to check once we get into the air. And plug that all in, set the altimeters and all that good stuff. So, full rich, full prop, parking brake off, and zoom out a little bit higher, and I'm ready to fly. So, when you're taking off, just make sure to keep the plane straight. Did I turn on auto rudder as part of because it felt like it was going pretty straight. No, I turned it off. Oh, right as I say that, it starts to get squirrely. So the plane is first going to level out as your tail gets off of the ground, and now you're just rolling on the 2 front wheels. And once your airspeed hits around 60, just do a gentle takeoff. That part isn't too hard. It's more difficult with the crosswind. But if you're heading pretty much straight into the wind like I am, it's a lot easier. I'm going to keep full throttle and adjust my climb so I maintain around 70 knots. I can pull this back in now, not that much, about here. And that's around 1,000 foot per minute climb. Yeah, it's pretty much at 1,000 feet per minute. That's a max reasonable climb for the plane as it's loaded right now. I have the default load, which includes a passenger. Without a passenger and without some baggage, you can get a bit higher climb, but I kind of use 1,000 as rule of thumb for a fast, low altitude climb, and 500 is kind of a nice cruise climb. So I'm going to keep going up to around 6,000 feet. Actually, I'm going to level off at 3,000 and then demonstrate how to use the altitude setting in the autopilot. So let's level out. I'm just adjusting my trim until I'm more or less level. I'm going to throttle back to 75% while I mess with the autopilot. Oh, trim needs a little bit more work. Okay, I'll just do a gentle, barely climb, just to set my trim where it needs to be. And now we'll look at autopilot for a moment. The autopilot controls are all down here. This is your heading selector. This is your altitude selector. Sorry, I was trimming again. And to start the enabling of autopilot, notice how up here on the top there's no green words. That means your auto is completely off. Nothing has been initialized yet. The first thing you want to do is probably set a level altitude hold. So let's turn on altitude hold. And right now it chose kind of an arbitrary number. I don't know why it chooses what it does, but now suddenly your altitude hold is on. It's hard to see in the sun, but there's a little triangle light above the button that shows it's on, and it also tells you it's on up here. But it's trying to bring you down to 1,700 feet. If I engage autopilot right now, it'll put me in a dive, and it'll try to level out at 1,700, which is not what I want to do. So I'm going to synchronize it to the current altitude by pushing this button.
Raptors X-ray Golf Sierra, you are leaving my airspace frequency chain.
quiet. I'm tutorialing.
Deer Valley Tower Cub
I should have
Crafters
probably
Alpha
turned that off
Sierra
for
X-ray
the video,
Golf
but
Sierra
whatever.
frequency change.
This isn't an ATC tutorial. And so now at least my heading bug is set to 2700, but still notice the altitude hold is set to 1700 because we haven't actually changed that yet. What I'm going to do is disable and re-enable the altitude hold, and suddenly now it's, or not suddenly, but it has now set to 2700, which is where I'm at. And you'll notice that there's a purple kind of triangle that'll show up. What was happening is that this was on the screen before, but as soon as I turned on the altitude hold to 1700, this purple triangle shot down because that is the direction that the autopilot is trying to take me, and it was trying to put me into a dive to get to 1700 feet. And it's slow to respond. So once I changed to my new altitude, that thing took a second to come back up to level. And so one of the kind of mistakes people make in this plane is setting an altitude that's too low, putting the plane into a dive, and then even if they set their current altitude, if they keep the autopilot on, the autopilot will take some time to level their plane back out. So keep that in mind. When you turn on autopilot, you should always be seeing the purple flight director indicator at least somewhere close to the direction you're currently flying. We climbed above 2700 a little bit, so the purple is below it, but you can barely see it there, and I trust that once I hit the autopilot enable button, which is right here, the plane will point me down, but then it will bring it right back up and keep me level at 2700. Now, we're heading opposite from the direction that I want to go, which is fine. What I'm going to do, we want to be heading kind of northeast. So I'm now going to demonstrate the heading functionality, which is similar to most other autopilots. Like, most of this is similar, but there are a few variations. There's a little heading bug that is bright blue on the dial indicator, and then is also printed right next to the main heading. I'm going to set a heading of maybe 45, and then all you have to do is click heading. Heading enables up here, HDG, and your plane will turn around to match the new heading. The airport that I want to head to is Sedona, which is one of the airports in the tutorial. And that airfield is at 5,000 feet elevation. So we'll need to climb to clear some mountains as we get there. What I'm going to do is, before we start the climb, I'm going to actually put our destination in the flight plan. There are two ways of doing this. First, I'm going to do the way that I would probably do it in real life if we were doing this route, which would be, I want to go from where I currently am to Sedona. And you can do that by clicking Set Direct Course To, which will bring up this screen. You can select a waypoint, and our airport is KSEZ, Sedona, enter, tell your bearing, your distance, you hit activate. Okay, we're a little bit off. And it will make a point from where you are to the destination up here, and you can just fly direct there. However, if you did what you should have done, and I didn't for the sake of time and the tutorial, and I knew we could do it in the air, but what you can instead do is make a flight plan, which is on this screen. You can hit activate FPL and it shows you this. If you select your flight plan ahead of time in the world map, it'll pre-populate the stuff. I didn't do it just so I could show how to do it, but what we could do is set an origin, which we took off from KDVT, I'm pretty sure, Phoenix Deer Valley. Yep, that's this one right here. And then we don't have any en route waypoints, so you can add more if you want. You can hit a destination, which is KSEZ, and now it generates the flight plan for you, which is KDVT. Don't need any en route waypoints. Destination KSEZ. It tells you the altitude of the airfield, which is really handy, 4,700 feet, and then the bearing and all that. So we have to disable, and now that this flight plan is set, we can go to the Direct To menu, hit Cancel to Direct To, and now this it shows our flight plan that would have originally taken. Oops, I accidentally clicked. Okay, I clicked out of it. If you do accidentally click something, you can just click out of it and it'll go there. So now I'm going to do two things before I go back to this menu. I'm going to enable a climb to 6,000 feet, and to do that, I'm going to... Sometimes it does like stray clicks on the screen. I think that's just a game bug. Normally, when I sometimes click around here, it'll just click on the screen randomly, but just ignore that. I'm going to set a climb to 6,000 feet. I'm going to do that by changing our altitude bug, which is the blue number right here, to 6,000. And then, using the vertical speed setting, which is this mode, I'm going to turn it on, which will then change this to VS 0 FPM and add a little blue target right here too. I'm going to nose up, which is dial down, and set a vertical speed upwards of 500. Negative numbers are downward if you want to go down, and your altitude target is lower. Now, since our altitude hold isn't on, but vertical speed mode will take you at your current climb rate to your altitude bug, and then it will turn on altitude hold. So that's that. We are now climbing. Now that we have some altitude at about 3,000 feet, it's past the point where full rich is good. I'm going to slowly lean our mixture by taking the percentage down, and you'll notice that our RPM starts to increase. At a certain point, once I keep leading it, it'll start to decrease again. It's still increasing, still increasing. Okay, it's going back down, so I'm gonna go back forward a little bit, and then more or less search until I find the ideal mixture for our altitude. And every few thousand feet of altitude change, I recommend coming back to the mixture and tweaking it again. At maybe 8,000 or 9,000 feet, you're going to be about 20 or 30% mixture. At sea level, you're going to be maybe 60. So there's an optimum mixture that you can find just by tweaking for maximum RPM. So now we're still on a nice kind of lazy climb at 500 feet per minute. Our airspeed is okay. This is a good climb airspeed. And now what I'm going to do is turn on nav. This is something that the game might not default you to. If you click on this dial, it will open up a menu giving you options for what you want to do about this dial specifically. There are bearing pointers here, which can help if you're using different types of navigational beacons. There's a timer, which is helpful for navigation too. But the main thing we're looking for is CDI source. If your game starts like this and has a green arrow for VOR 1 or 2, those are for VOR beacons that are good for navigation, and edge cases are an old radio-based system that, now that you have a GPS on modern flight controls, you probably don't use. So we don't use the VORs right now, and instead switch to FMS, which will now set your CDI to be, I'm going to click on it again to close it, to be tracking our purple line right here. Once you have your CDI set to GPS, or FMS, which is using GPS, you can click nav. This will disable heading, and instead make you intercept the purple line and then follow it at whatever heading is required for that. So you'll notice as soon as we pass over this purple line and get kind of centered on it, the plane will start to pitch or start to roll left, and now we're following the flight path all the way to Sedona. We'll maintain our climb to 6,000. That'll be fine. What else can I go over while we're here? Wing level is a function that's kind of like a basic autopilot that more or less keeps you... Well, it keeps the wings level. It doesn't command you on a certain heading or anything. It was like hold whatever position you're currently flying. And it can be good if you want to not set a destination or anything, but need to set wing level so you can mess with other controls for a second. Yaw damper. I don't think yaw damper is actually supposed to be active when we're using autopilot, but if you're in kind of high wind scenarios and you want some help staying on course, you can turn on yaw damper. I don't really do it on this airplane though, it's kind of small for a yaw damper. VNav and IAS, you won't use those buttons, and then approach, probably not either. So now we're climbing. Here's some other remarks, is that the barometer setting for the backup is this dial right here. I think it set us default to 30.08, but if you need to change it, you can. The barometer setting for this screen can be accessed by clicking full. This will bring you to a full screen horizon, and then you use these twin dials right here. This is two different dials. The little long skinny one and then the big one are actually different. The big one is course adjustment if you're the small one's course adjustment if you're setting a manual course. The big one is barometer, so I'm tweaking this. You can see that it's changing the barometer. The left one is heading and altitude, which is actually just a duplicate of the two. See, yeah, it just clicked on my CDI even though I didn't click on it for some reason. So heading and altitude can be set right here, or you can use this double dial. I don't use the double dial because it's hard to mouse over right. You can use these instead. Other things, you have your audio, which you can set radio stuff with. You can click standby to set your frequency, and then this button to change between the frequencies. Split brings you here. Once you split, this dial then lets you, the small part lets you zoom the map in and out. You can also use these buttons or use that plane button to center your map back on the plane. Then you can drag around if you want to, well, drag around. Adjust my trim or my mixture a little bit as we're climbing. Right about there, I think. And then the big dial, once we're in split view, will change between these three tabs here on the bottom. There's map, flight plan, and procedures. Procedures for autopilot, like instrument stuff, ignore that for now. That's beyond the scope of this kind of beginner tutorial. The flight plan was the one we just did about the waypoints and stuff like that, and then map is where we are. The menu will open up an option where you can set some frequencies. This is like all of the options at once. You can do the map, you can do the flight plan, you can do the procedures, you can do the radio frequencies that I showed you earlier. I don't really ever use this button, but it's there. And then back the menu actually is an overlay, so if I hit back, I'm now back on the tab view, which is kind of unintuitive. Direct to, I already covered. If you click on it, you can click it again to undo it. All of these four are kind of like these three are overlays that you can toggle. Nearest shows you a handy list of all the nearest airfields if you need to make an emergency and set down somewhere or want to just find a destination. You can click on this and then activate direct to or insert it into your flight plan. And then you can click again nearest to bring it out. This is your transponder over here on the right if you want to mess with transponder codes. Otherwise though, I think we're about done with all the avionics, which is just in time for cruise. Although the terrain looks a little bit close on the horizon. I didn't actually look at this route very well. I guess we can use manual heading to avoid the terrain a little bit. That seems... Now I'm going to climb and then descend again just so I can show you climbing and descending a little bit more. So we're right now at 6,000. I'm going to increase to 7,000, click vertical speed, go another 500. Normally, if I was actually flying, I would just go around this mountain instead of climbing over it, but this is good practice. Propeller's still at 100. Now this is a good point of checking the fuel once we're on the final climb. I'm currently on my left tank, and if I reset my camera, left is down to maybe 13 gallons. The right is still way above 15, so what I'm going to do now is reset the camera again and click right tank. And now we're feeding from the right. Just to show you what happens if you accidentally shut it off, just go back to the left or right tank and it'll come right back. Don't worry about it. So I'm going to adjust my mixture again now that we're climbing a little bit higher. Now we were good where we're at. Carb heat, I don't think the game simulates carburetor ice. At least I haven't experienced it, so I don't mess with that setting. Cabin heat, your pilot's invincible, so it doesn't matter. And that's more or less all the controls. That's too loud. The Cub is flaps are still up. That was something I forgot. That's kind of a beginner mistake, but honestly, doing all this tutorial explanation has made me this makes it hard to focus on all the little things. The flaps are just put them up. I should have put them up right after takeoff, but I forgot. And was a little bit preoccupied with all the explanations. So flaps are now up. Those should go up right away. Oops. And yeah, I think now I'm going to increase the time scale of the sim a little bit by using some custom keybinds. The time scale is really sketchy and weird. Alright, I'm gonna bring it back down because now we're at 7,000 feet at cruise, and now we're going to set our cruise throttle and RPM. I was already at 75% throttle from the initial takeoff, or initial kind of climb. If I was climbing harder than 500 feet per minute, I would have put it all the way to forward, but I just kept the 75% throttle. But now that we're at cruise, we want to maintain the 75% throttle, and then bring our prop RPM down to around 2100, which is slowly bringing it down to right about here. This is and then adjust our mixture one more time to find maximum RPM. This is our kind of cruise performance, and the target cruise speed, true airspeed of this plane is around 105 knots or 100 knots, and we're right around there. So now we're in cruise, we're using the least amount of fuel possible, we're doing the most efficient flight, and now I can turn the sim speed up. If you go too fast, it starts to wobble, so I'm going to not do that. The rumor is that due to the instability with rapid flight, instead of removing the feature from the game, they removed the menu that you used to control this. In the settings, there's a keybind for flight speed, and if you push it, nothing happens. But there's also a keybind for speed up and slow down, which do still work. So I have those set, and I can't tell how fast I'm actually speeding up right now unless I look at my clock, and I can see it's like 4 times as fast as normal, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 5 times as fast as normal. So, and then when I slow down, I have to use that clock to figure out how slow I'm going to. So, there's Sedona, still a little bit away. I'm gonna climb more just for the sake of showing a descent. Are we at real time now? Yeah, we are. Cool. So I'm gonna break out of cruise, and when you're doing any kind of climbing, you set the propeller RPM back to 100. I'm gonna set my throttle to 100 too, and do a little bit more aggressive climb, maybe 750. So I'm gonna dial my altitude back up to, let's say, 8,500. I'm gonna increase my vertical speed to 700, and then watch what my airspeed is. If my airspeed starts slowing down past maybe 75, I know that my current vertical speed target is too aggressive for the altitude I'm at. But I don't think it is. I think we're fine with the current climb. We're slowing down a little bit, which is kind of perfect. So, punch it to new altitude. We're now at 7,000 feet, at which point we should probably switch our altimeter to 29902, which I can do by full dialing this down to 902. And let's do a climb. Nice, I think I said 29902 because I'm pretty sure at this point this is what the weather is at this altitude in place, because I just flew this flight to practice before now, but maybe I'm wrong. Let me see. That was a big change.
Center, Cub Crafters Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra is type Cub Crafters CC 1912 miles west of Kilo Papa India November.
They're gonna tell me my
request flight following.
Altimeter.
Cub Crafters Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra Alpha
airport, but I'm pretty sure that seemed like a huge shift though between 30.08 and 292.
Squawk 5411 Cub Crafters.
Let's see, it doesn't really matter. I can tune into an airport and figure it out. Oh, no. I'm right.
Radar contact 12 miles northwest of Kilo Papa India November 8,000 feet. Altimeter 29.902.
Cool. So I'm right. And we set our altimeter appropriately and acknowledge radar contact.
Copy Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra.
So we're still climbing just fine. Let's look over. I'm going to demonstrate some descent speeds, and then I'm going to speed up the game a little bit. So we're leveling out here. Adjust the mixture again. I'm going to throttle down a little bit because our RPM is already at max. Throttling down to 75%. Right about there. And now let's do a descent. So it's the same principle, just in reverse. I'm going to dial my altitude back down to, let's say, 7,000. Or maybe we should just maintain 8 until we clear those mountains over there, huh? Yeah, I'm probably just going to do that. So I'm going to actually just set to current altitude and call it. And we'll just cruise here for a little bit. So I'll bring my prop RPM back down to 2100. And we'll cruise past these little hills and then descend. And speed up the game. Too much.
Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra, contact Albuquerque Center on 128.45.
128.45 Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra. Albuquerque Center, Cub Crafters Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra.
At this point, I'm going to descend to 6,000 feet, which is 1,000 feet above the
Cub Crafters Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra
airport.
Albuquerque Center. Continue as planned. Altimeter 29.902. Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra, contact Phoenix approach on 126.375.
When you go so fast like that, the thing just
Going to
you fly faster than you can talk.
Cub
So
Crafters X-Ray
I'm just
Golf
going to set them
Sierra.
up and not tuning anything. This isn't a tutorial for that. So now we're heading into Sedona. We're about 10 minutes away. We need to drop about 3,000 feet in 10 minutes, which means that our minimum descent would be around like 300 or 400 feet per minute. I'm just going to do 5 feet per minute or 500 feet per minute descent. This plane can go probably 1,500 to 2,000 if you need to, but I'm just going to set us down to 6,000 and go vertical speed down 500, and I'm going to throttle back to about 50%, which should keep us at a good cruise speed. Just by experience, you can kind of learn what the plane likes in terms of speeds, and that's good. So now we're maintaining our current speed. We're descending to 6,000, and I'm going to speed up the sim a little bit again. Alright, now we leveled out at 6,000. Autopilot will still take over. I'm going to return to 75% throttle. So I maintain my cruise speed as we get close to the airport. I haven't really picked an approach or anything. I'm going to slow down and probably just going to enter a base approach, turn left slightly, and then just land on the runway that way, which isn't super proper. I'm not going to even talk to ATC. I'm just going to do it. So what I'm going to do, just to demonstrate the autopilot more, because that's probably a little bit more unintuitive than actually just flying the plane, I'm going to set my heading bug kind of in the direction that I want to intercept to do my base turn at, So right around here, click heading instead of nav. It'll break off from the purple, and then go to my my heading. Should kind of put us perpendicular to the runway, I think. That looks pretty good, yeah. Once I turn, actually I'll now disengage autopilot and we'll take the rest in manually. I recommend having a joystick button set to disengage autopilot. It's really good for safety and trim reasons, and nearly all planes have a disconnect button already on their stick for that, or yoke for that purpose. So I'm gonna disengage the autopilot, and now we're manual. For approach, we set our mixture back to rich, or at this altitude, probably 90%. If it was a lower altitude landing, I'd do 100, but this is a good limit right here. Going to set RPM all the way up, and now we control have manual throttle. So I'm going to make a final turn to final. It was a bit later than I should have, but I was again distracted by tutorialing. I'm gonna reduce throttle to around 50%. This is now mostly based on feel and kind of the good practices of a landing, using throttle for altitude and pitch for AOA, or is it the other way around? Bringing it down. The Cub is a very slow and floaty plane once you drop flaps. I'm going to drop full flaps just for demonstration. On a runway this long, you could probably land without flaps, but I'm going to just show how slow you can do a landing. So with full flaps down, 500. Going to keep the nose pointed at the runway. I'm going to do very minimum throttle, almost none, maybe 15%, and just glide in. Ooh, there's some crosswind on this one right now. It's going to be difficult. Shouldn't have done live weather. And I'm going to just, yeah, I wasn't expecting that. Thought it was clear weather. So I touched down a few times. I had too much angle of attack there. This is hard to both try to describe and do at the same time, but that was a decent enough landing. You want to then pull back on the stick until your tail is on the ground before you brake. Otherwise, the plane can tip forward and ground loop, and you kind of just like flop over and nosedive because you're only rolling on two wheels and you don't have full stability. So to show that from an outside perspective, let's see if I can pick up some speed. This is going to be hard to do, but I didn't really explain the approach that well, but in a Cub, compared to most other planes, you want to come in more level and flare less and be going slower. You'll get a feel for it. It's fine. So see how right now our tail is as difficult as, but when you're taking off, yeah, this is squirrely. Your tail's not on the ground, and if you then cut off and brake, see how you're tipping forward? Like, woo, you can go all the way and actually nose down. So instead, I don't know how much runway I have left either, but instead you want to pull up on the elevator and really squish the tail of the plane into the ground when you're braking, and then you don't have any chance of tipping forward. So just watch out for that. The whole time I have to be on the rudder, but I couldn't see the runway, and that was whatever. So just some tips for landing. That wasn't a very good demonstration of one, but you'll get the hang of it. And then with that, I'll just do the engine shutdown right here on the runway, and that's a pretty straightforward operation too. You turn ignition off, turn alternator off, turn fuel cut off once you're actually done taxiing, and then you can turn off your lights, avionics, master battery, and throttle all the way back, and then your plane's turned off. So that's a kind of basic tutorial of the Cub. My flying wasn't that great. Don't judge me too hard. It's hard to fly and talk at the same time, but that was good. It should be enough to get you started, and just get a bunch of practice flying and landing, and you'll be all set. Thanks for watching.